I'm Catherine Kingsley.
And I'm Catherine Stern.
And this is
Contemplating Culture,
a missionary walk through a secular age. Together we journey through A Secular Age by Charles Taylor, a book looking at the history and philosophy of how the world got where it is, and the impacts of our contemporary culture for us today as missionaries.
And we're inviting you to join the conversation. Welcome back, everyone, to Contemplating Culture. Last time we were together, we were talking about what we actually mean by a secular age. We looked at Charles Taylor's definition of a secular age, and we talked about the importance of language, the importance of ideas in shaping our missionary outlook, in shaping our culture. So we ended last time with the image of the marketplace, that the world that we live in now, this secular age, is a bit like a market full of different stalls with lots of options out there as to what life means, what direction you could take. And that the church, we're actually just one stall in that marketplace. And that's what people see us as, one option that they might take all of or some of.
It's actually really interesting just hearing you say that, because I can almost see people's frustration that the church might have so much presence in the world if it's only one stall, that even though at one point it was a large part of society, the less and less it becomes, the more frustrating it must be for people who aren't in the church to see the influence I guess it has. And I guess part of what we're doing here is to try and understand what it's like to not be in the church so that we can be true missionaries in the world.
Yeah, because I was thinking as I was saying it that there's this double frustration happening, actually. That there's the people on the outside going, you are so full of yourselves, you're one stall and you think you can talk for all of us. But there's people sitting on the inside going, we are the stall. Like, don't you understand? Jesus is the way, the truth, the life. What we're offering you is freedom. It's fulfillment. It's everything. Why are there any other stalls anyway? That's a big disconnect. So, where are we going today?
Yeah, so today I've titled The Pursuit of Fullness. So we're kind of moving on just the next couple of pages. And it's this idea that in your life as a human person, what is it that you're turning to have a full life? So this is going to be very different depending on if you're a person of faith or if you're not a person of faith. And the image that I kind of have of this is that at the end of life, you either see a closed door or even just a wall, that there's nothing beyond this life. Or you're a person who at death's door actually sees an open door, that even though I can't see what's beyond here, I know that there is something. And I'm living all of here, all of this time that I have now, in that mindset that this is not everything. There's something beyond here. And so we'll look at this in terms of like the closed door or the open door mindset. So in the first instance, the closed door, where you've kind of got that finish line is at the wall, the closed door, whatever it is. Taylor would say that there's three kind of things that people are trying to fill up on. That between now and death's door, there's this, I need to fill up. And so he would say these three things are happiness. So how much am I enjoying myself? And this will look like all kinds of different things. So I think particularly there's a movement now towards experiences, that now that I have the freedom to travel, to try different things, that maybe people in the past had limitations. But now that I'm free of those limitations, I'm going to have as many different experiences as I can. Now that I'm not so held to the consequences of my actions in a whole variety of different ways, I am just going to enjoy my life. Enjoy every moment that I'm having. And the next one would be finding something of fulfillment. So it might mean work. It might mean projects. It might mean family. Something that I'm building or working towards, something that is making me feel full, that is kind of hitting that little button in me. And then there's also often going to be this third one of a contribution to the good. That actually I live this whole time not just about me, but actually I'm benefited if I contribute something to the good. A really simple way that I've heard this expressed is I want to leave this world better than I found it. That you can be very content living your life if that's your contribution to the good. A full life is to leave this world better than you found it. And that doesn't need to have any correspondence to a transcendence outside of this time.
So you could even see, like in like a current kind of MIDI culture where everything's about me and my family, you could see those rolled into one. Like I find happiness living in a happy little life with me and my immediate family. I find my fulfillment in that family and doing the best that I can for them and really investing in giving them everything. And that's actually how I'm leaving this world better. Like I'm investing in the next generation of my own family.
Yep, definitely. So those in the closed door mindset, you'll see emerging from this that sense of FOMO. That sense of, if I don't do all the things, achieve all the things, I'm missing out on something that life has to offer. And I want to make the most out of this life. I want to get as much out of it as I can. And so it's really distressing to see someone who's the same age who's achieved more than you, or who has kids already, who's married already, who's got a certain salary already, who's got a property already, that all of these things start to become not just something that's happening, but something that's impeding on my happiness. My fullness somehow seems to be diminished when other people are living a fullness, because it's now a very individual race to that door. And whether or not you're choosing to see it as a race, there's definitely a feeling of FOMO that brings about this kind of building sense of anxiety. On the other hand, you have the people of the open door mindset who you won't necessarily see trying to stack all these things up in the same way. And I mean, maybe you will, because that's kind of the cross pressure of being in relationship with other people, but they don't have to, because there's this understanding that actually this life isn't the best that there is. There's actually something better beyond here. This life's great. And yes, we should be happy. We should be seeking fulfillment. We should be contributing to the good. But we don't need to hoard those things. That we know from the scriptures that our treasure's meant to be in heaven. We're not meant to be building our treasure here. And so though we can partake of all these things that are good for us, we're not constricted to this earthly life to find them all.
I like that kind of comment about cross pressure that you're talking about, because I see it particularly in young people, and obviously I talk to a lot more who are in the church and have faith, but it's bigger than that, you know, that pressure of year 12 and you're trying to do the absolute best you can at the same time as work out what you've got to do next, and the building pressure of trying to, you know, and hold down a part-time job and, you know, be a youth group leader and carrying all this stuff, because there's this sense of I've got to get it done now and I've got to make the decisions now, and because I might miss out somehow. And that all of that anxiety makes sense when you talk about that closed door mentality that I've only got this amount of life to get it all done in. And it doesn't make sense when you think about the open door. But I think when we live in a world where almost everybody else has a closed door, it's kind of you pick up that anxiety. That's how the world is.
Yeah. It's increasingly so, I think. I think the more we move along this trajectory of the marketplace mentality of secular, that anxiety is on the rise, because there is so much pressure on what you need to do, achieve, become as a human person, increasingly so. And the world, I think, is expanding. The options that we have are expanding at a rate that we can't deal with. I don't think we're actually made to be making as many decisions as we are in our current day and age. So you have anxiety around, what am I going to choose to do with my life? Who I'm going to be with my life? Am I going to be with them forever? Am I going to be good enough? Are they going to be good enough? Are there going to need to be compromises made? What kind of milk are we going to drink as a family? Like, there's just so many things that we've kind of figure out that I guess in years gone by, it wasn't so much pressure to have it done by a certain time or in a certain way. Like, that there's so many options that now we have to choose at every single point. And increasingly, I think the thing that has diminished is that as that sense of communal society has decreased, so have our capacity for society to kind of help us along this way. That increasingly we have to be the ones to carve out our fulfillment and happiness. No one else is going to kind of sweep us up in the community that takes us into that place of fulfillment, that I'm only going to be fulfilled if I choose what I want to do, and if I choose the person I want to marry. At every single point, it has to be me. And so there's a lot of pressure, I think, on the individual, where in years gone by, I think maybe the community carried some of that burden.
Absolutely, that there was less choice somehow, and you, if you like, made the best of what you got. But it was not a marketplace society, so it was a very different, we can't imagine, I don't think, what it would be like. I look back and think, could I make the best of something like that? But I think I would have been in a different world, therefore influenced by a whole different culture, so maybe there's no point trying to work out what I would have done. What I was thinking, though, was that it's not just anxiety that leads to, that makes a whole lot of sense of the depression out there too, that if you're like in a space of depression, happiness and fulfillment, contributing to the good just don't exist for you really, do they? And I guess that could be the result of a build-up of anxiety to a point where you just crash. But you could also kick into that instead of anxiety, really, that you could respond to the pressure of this world that we sit in and kind of literally with an I can't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. If you can see what you think your life is supposed to be and it's not that, depression's very close.
Which then makes sense why there is so much more depression and anxiety than there used to be in that world which you're talking about, where like society made a lot more of those choices and carried us a lot more. Less pressure on the individual.
Yeah. And so when I was exploring this idea in kind of cartoon form, I had it as boxes. So boxes that you're carrying. And I think when you look at it as those boxes, I think now we've got to carry those boxes ourselves. I've got to carry the happiness box and the fulfillment box and the contribution to the good box. And I'm actually probably going to try and get as many of those boxes as I can. So you could think of as anxiety as, you know, being piled over with too many boxes that I'm carrying. And depression is either I've been carrying too many boxes so I drop them all, or I look at how many boxes I'm meant to carry and I just don't bother picking them up. Whereas I think in times gone by, maybe you had this, well, let's carry this box together. You know, that you can carry a bigger load when you're kind of moving together.
So then in terms of boxes, how would you reckon you'd look if you're a person of faith and you see that the door is not closed at the end? It's not like people of faith don't seek happiness or fulfillment or contribution to the good. It's not like, oh, so I don't have to pick up boxes at all. Like, how do we carry them differently, do you think? Or how do we approach it differently?
I think it's something around daily bread. That we can pick up what we're meant to for the day, and at the end of the day, there's a freedom to put it back down again. That we truly find rest when we can hand over whatever we've picked up to the Lord at the end of the day. And if you're doing that every day, it's not building up over time. The pressure's not building up. That you might be, in the day, you might still be carrying the same things, but there's relief, there's rest. And not only that, but you're not alone.
Absolutely. And I guess that's the core of what we have as Christianity, isn't it? It's not an open door. An open door is part of the worldview that we have, but ultimately we're not offering an open door like an endless set of possibilities for finding meaning and fulfillment. We're offering a relationship with a person. That's where we find that fulfillment. That's the source of our happiness. He's the contribution to the good. And I think one thing that's really helped me in my kind of struggles around anxiety has been learning to see him as the carrier of my boxes. That I don't actually have to juggle anything. That when he says, "Come to me, all you who labour and are heavy burdened, and I will give you rest," that he meant it, and that I can trust him. him who loved me so much that he died for me, that he's got my good in mind, that he's not going to drop the ball on me or forget about me, but that he's big enough to manage my stuff and manage it in the best possible way for me.
Yeah. So one of the other things Jesus says in Scripture is kind of to not let your right hand know what your left is doing. And I think it's that kind of thing as well, that we entrust the fruit of what we do to the Lord, that we don't have to sit there with a spreadsheet calculating how much happiness have I taken from life and how much fulfillment am I getting and where is my contribution to the good and how much is it and is it enough, that we are just in this relationship of love, and it's like God takes the fruit and it's waiting for us in heaven, that we don't even need to worry about it at all, how much it is, how big it is, who else it's affected, that because we're in this relationship of love, that's enough.
Absolutely. There's a scripture in the Old Testament too that talks about your mercies are new every morning. And I think the flip side is that my failures, the ways that I mess up, the ways that I'm like, I just contributed to the opposite of the good today, or I had a really unhappy day today, that I can entrust those into his hands as well. And if you like, begin afresh tomorrow without having to pick up the burden of all my failures and like carry that onwards.
Just so relieving to think about, isn't it?
That one brings me to suffering too.
Sure. So one of the other things that Taylor talks about in this kind of section is the idea of the cross. The idea that to people who are walking with the open door mindset, not only is there freedom to not carry all those boxes, but there's also a freedom to be encumbered by something else, the burden of the cross. For people who aren't of faith, walking with that closed door mentality, they look at people of faith who are fasting, who have all of these devotional practices, who have self-denial as part of their practice of faith, and are just like, are you guys crazy? Like, that just doesn't make any sense. Why would you do that? And so as people who in our life are taking that up, I guess we're not just saying that this is a good or a nice thing. I don't think Jesus thought taking up the cross was a good or a nice thing, but in fact it's essential. It is the only way to have the fullness of fullness. It can be a very difficult thing to understand, to say the fullness that you have pursuing all these things in your earthly life, and you might even feel full by them, but there's a fullness that's bigger than that. And that's why we're carrying these crosses.
I guess I'm thinking about religious life, and I'm thinking about the way people look at our vows. Like, why would any rational, sane person take vows of celibacy, voluntary poverty, and voluntary obedience? And we talk about this as a witness to the resurrection, that they make sense only when you have an open door, when you know that absolute fulfillment happens beyond that door. And really, the witness of those things in our lives is meant to remind everyone of that open door. And I think it still does, in the sense that it jars. People will see what we do and they're like, what? Are you crazy? And maybe it doesn't then lead them to investigate further properly, but it's meant to.
And that's the thing. I think a lot of people might look at people of faith as though they're weak or they're naive or they're using it as a crutch. But between you and I, we've got a number of degrees. We're both very educated, quite intelligent people, that it's not a naive walking. We have a lot of reason and rationality behind the choices that we're making to be people of faith.
Absolutely. And look, if you look in the small picture of people's lives, people actually understand. Like, parents voluntarily get up to screaming children in the middle of the night. That's not a rational decision unless you can see beyond that child screaming in this moment. That we actually still, as a human race, understand that making sacrifices for a long term or a greater good is a good and a rational thing. The thing is that as a society, we've lost touch with the good that we are making sacrifices towards in our faith.
And it's interesting you say that, Kat, because I think for people who are walking with that closed door mentality, I think there's moments in life where they see a crack of light. So, for example, in my family at the moment, we've just had a new baby being born. And I think that's one of the moments when there's new life coming in, that there's this wonder, this little crack of light that maybe there's something bigger than what's here. Or when someone we really care about dies, I think that's another moment when there's this little crack of light of this can't be all there is. Or I remember a number of years ago talking to someone who lived in some government housing, and they were a drug addict. They had all of these things in their life that said there is no God. But we were sitting having a cup of tea one afternoon. They started telling me about this moment they had where pretty much they were dead for 2 minutes or something on the operating table, and the experience they had of being on this river with this boat and this light kind of beckoning them in. And it's amazing how many stories you hear of the same kind of thing of, I was in this place, I experienced this light beckoning me, I heard some kind of voice or something like that. And it's like this sacred little thing that they hold on to of something that's beyond here, this little crack of light. But it's very confronting to go from there is no God to then acting as though there is a God. There's a lot of steps in between. But I think even for people who aren't walking in the life of faith, there are these little moments through life that point to a questioning, a wondering. Yeah.
I think the myth we can sometimes live with, though, as people of faith, is one around that if you don't have faith, that there's somehow an emptiness in you, and that these people walk around like with an emptiness that's screaming out for the presence of God. And well, in some sense, yes, that's true, but I don't think that they're aware of that emptiness. And if you like, those cracks might be showing them somehow inside, yeah, there's a place in me that is meant for my relationship with God, and I suddenly glimpsed it. But most of the time, my life is so full of other things that I forget even to think about that I just get distracted. I've filled my life with other meanings, with other happinesses, that I'm just not conscious of a desire for more, or not even conscious that that moment meant anything beyond itself.
Yeah, I think it's very true that, like, I know for me, when I think about the work of evangelization, I kind of swing between those two extremes of a need to take the message of God's love out there because people need to know God's love, and without it, I can only imagine, what travesties of emptiness their life is in, to looking at people with these super full lives who put on this front of, actually, I'm really enjoying my life and I'm really satisfied with how it is, and this is how I've chosen for it to be. I'm not stuck here. And then me kind of saying, Lord, where is that pain point of where your love needs to meet them? Because bringing you into their life is just going to make their life harder. And I think we get a sense then of actually being a Christian is a hard life in some ways, and it's not rational. And we have to keep remembering the kerygma, the heart of the gospel message, to really know why we're doing what we're doing. I guess you have to keep remembering the freedom that you have. We know that there's actually joy. And this is Pope Francis's encyclical that he wrote, Evangelii Gaudium, is the joy of the gospel. We're not meant to be walking around as Lenten people through our lives. We're meant to be walking around with that joy of the resurrection.
Absolutely. Which brings us back to that point I made earlier, that our lives are about a relationship, if we're talking about our Christian faith. That, yes, we can look at the practices that we take on, the things we choose to believe, the life we choose, but ultimately, if we're going to live with the joy of the gospel, it's about the joy of relationship with that person of Jesus. It's about knowing God's love and finding our ultimate meaning and fulfillment in that place. And that's a whole different thing to committing to a belief system that means I do X, Y, and Z. and I'll live on after my death. There's a very different feel in committing to a person. It's like marriage or something. I don't look ahead in that relationship, or maybe I do if I live in a marketplace world, but I don't look ahead in that relationship with Jesus. I just look to that relationship.
That's awesome. This is a very full and rich conversation, and I think even for me, it's just given me that hope, that reminder that there is a lot of joy to be had in the Christian life, and that we are not alone, that we have someone who walks with us, who carries the burden, that we don't need to do it all, we don't need to measure it, we can just live in that daily relationship of love.
That's it. And there's a real freedom in thinking about it and talking about it that way, isn't it?
All right, so just to kind of process what we've talked about today further, I want to send you away with some things to kind of put into your week if you find it helpful. So the first one would just be have a conversation with someone about something that you've heard today or thought about today in this conversation. Just explore how these ideas fit in the real world. To look and notice those people that are being weighed down by anxiety, by distress, those people who look unhappy or they're floundering, anxious or depressive kind of movements, and just having compassion. It's really difficult to be a human person in the world at these times. And finally, just to notice in yourself those moments when you feel like I have to or I need to, those things that are building up as pressure, and just in those moments inviting Jesus in as the person who can lift that burden, who renews you every day, and who can walk with you in loving relationship.
Amen.
So thank you, and until next time, be well. This has been Contemplating Culture, a podcast produced by the Missionaries of God's Love Sisters. For more information from today's episode, be sure to check out the show notes. We pray that today has blessed you, and most importantly, we invite you to continue the conversation.